My dear child, someone is fighting for you right now in a room you cannot enter, and the case being argued on your behalf through the night by a defense attorney who took your case personally is being built with a trust in you that exceeds anything you have ever been told to your face. Do not scroll past this. What I am about to reveal is not about the general spiritual truth that God fights your battles. This is about a specific case, a specific attorney, a specific room where arguments are being constructed on your behalf right now by someone who is working through the night, because the case they are building carries a deadline, and the trust driving every argument is a trust in you that is deeper than anything the visible world has communicated. The attorney is working, the case is being built, and you are the client. You have been feeling alone in the battle, not merely unsupported, specifically unseen in the depth of what you are carrying. You have been advocating for yourself in rooms where no one seemed to be standing in your corner, fighting with the particular exhaustion of a person who believes the weight is entirely theirs to bear, because no visible evidence of another fighter has appeared in any space the viewer has access to. My beloved child, the visible spaces are not where the case is being argued. The case is being argued in a room you were never invited into, by an attorney whose investment in your outcome is not obligatory but personal, not assigned but chosen, not casual, but through the night, every argument constructed, every piece of evidence assembled personal. Someone took your case, not reluctantly, with the full force of a belief in you that you did not know existed. Stay here. What I reveal next is who the attorney is, and what they saw in you that made the case worth fighting for at full investment. Type case being built if you have been feeling alone in your battle, fighting without visible support in rooms where no one seemed to be in your corner, and God just told you a defense attorney has been working through the night in a room you cannot enter, building a case on your behalf, driven by a trust in you that exceeds anything you have ever been told directly. Before we go any further, I need to tell you something that genuinely surprised me. A neuroscientist discovered a simple 7-second technique that actually rewires how your brain processes thoughts. And when I tried it, the difference was almost unsettling. My focus sharpened, ideas started connecting faster, and that mental fog, gone. This isn't manifestation nonsense. It's backed by real brain science, and thousands of people are already seeing results. But here's the catch. Only 5 spots are left. If something inside you is saying, try it, trust that instinct. Click the link in the description or pinned comment before it's too late. The attorney did not take your case because the case was easy. The attorney took your case because the attorney saw something in the client that made the difficulty of the case irrelevant. Decision to fight it, my beloved child. I need you to understand how a defense attorney selects a case worth fighting through the night for. Attorneys receive many cases. Most are processed during business hours, handled with competence, argued with professionalism, completed within the standard investment of effort the case's complexity warrants. A through-the-night case is different. A through-the-night case is one the attorney has taken personally. The specific, I am not leaving this office until the argument is airtight level of investment that an attorney produces when what they see in the client exceeds what the case file contains. Your case is the through-the-night kind, and the night has been long. My dear one, the attorney working your case is not building arguments from obligation. The arguments are being constructed from conviction. The specific, I believe in this client more than client believes in themselves conviction that produces the particular quality of advocacy where the attorney's passion for the outcome exceeds the client's hope for it. Your attorney's conviction about you is currently stronger than your conviction about yourself. And the gap between the attorney's belief and the client's belief is the fuel that has been powering the through-the-night work the client cannot see. The attorney believes in you more than you believe in you. That is the fuel. This message was not released for everyone who feels unsupported. This was aimed at the one person whose specific, battle-weary, I am in this alone exhaustion corresponds to the specific client who does not know the attorney is working pattern of a person whose case is being argued with full investment in a room the client has no access to. The person who does not know the battle they believe they are fighting alone is being fought by someone whose trust in them is the most powerful argument in the entire case file. Type stronger belief if you just realized someone believes in you more than you currently believe in yourself. And the gap between their conviction about you and your conviction about yourself is the fuel that has been powering through the night advocacy in a room you cannot enter on a case you did not know was being argued on your behalf. I have been watching you carry the weight of the battle alone since the season the visible support disappeared. And the watching has been the specific grief of a God who assigned the attorney to the case before the client concluded. They were fighting without representation, my dear one, not from the courtroom gallery observing the proceedings at a distance. From the attorney's office, where the case is being built, standing beside the desk, where the arguments are being constructed, while the client on the other side of the building is sitting in the waiting area, believing no one is working on their behalf, because the waiting area does not have access to what is happening in the office. I have been in the office, watching the work, the entire time. My beloved child, I watched the specific season. The alone in the battle conclusion was installed. There was a period where the visible support was present. People whose advocacy on your behalf was detectable, whose standing in your corner was vocal enough and consistent enough to register as representation. The visible support sustained the sense that you were not fighting alone. And then the visible support thinned, not because the people were malicious, because the visible layer of support is not the layer where the case is being argued. The visible support thinned, the invisible advocacy intensified, and the timing made the thinning feel like abandonment when the thinning was actually a transfer. I chose you for this message because the transfer was never explained. The visible support did not thin because you were being left without representation. The visible support thinned because the case was being transferred from the visible layer, where casual advocates operate during business hours, to the through-the-night layer where the attorney, who took the case personally, works with the full investment that casual advocates cannot sustain. My child, you were not abandoned by your support. Your case was transferred to a higher office, and the higher office works through the night. Type transferred, not abandoned, if God has been in the attorney's office, watching the case being built, and the visible support that thinned was never abandonment, but a transfer from the casual advocacy layer to the through-the-night layer, where the attorney who took your case personally works with full investment in rooms the client cannot see, because the higher office does not operate during business hours, and the night is where the strongest arguments are constructed. I know what the alone in the battle has been doing to the specific part of you where your belief in being worth fighting for is stored. My beloved child, the battle was not designed to be carried solo. The weight of what you have been processing was never calculated for a single body's capacity. You have been carrying a load whose distribution was designed for the person carrying it, plus the attorney arguing for it. And carrying a distributed load on a single frame produces the specific, structural, this weight exceeds, my design exhaustion that a person generates when the load they are bearing exceeds the solo capacity their body was built to sustain. The exhaustion was not weakness. It was overload on a frame designed for shared weight. My child, I watched the overload produce its specific wound at the layer where your belief in being worth fighting for is maintained. The wound was not produced by the battle itself. It was produced by the aloneness of the battle. Because a person fighting a battle alone draws a conclusion, a person fighting a battle with visible representation does not. The conclusion that the absence of someone fighting alongside them is evidence that the battle is not worth fighting for to anyone but the person in it. The conclusion says, if I were worth fighting for, someone would be fighting, and no one is fighting. Therefore, my case is not the kind of case someone takes personally. I watched the conclusion install itself through the silence of visible advocacy. Each day that passed without a visible advocate entering the fight added a data point to the conclusion, and the accumulation of data points produced the specific, I am not the kind of person people fight for identity that a person develops when the visible fighting for they are measuring by has been absent for a duration long enough to qualify as a pattern rather than a gap. The pattern was on the visible layer. The attorney was on the invisible layer. And the invisible layer was working harder than the visible layer ever did. The deepest wound the aloneness produced was not the exhaustion of carrying the battle solo. It was the specific, private, never-voiced moment where you stopped expecting anyone to show up and began restructuring your entire approach to difficulty around the assumption that you would always be your own only advocate. My dear child, you restructured, not dramatically, functionally. The specific, I will learn to fight without anyone. I will become sufficient on my own. I will stop looking toward the door of the courtroom expecting representation to walk through it. Restructuring that a person performs when the absence of visible advocacy has lasted long enough that expecting it becomes more painful than releasing the expectation entirely. You released the expectation, and releasing the expectation of being fought for was the most expensive adaptation the aloneness demanded. My beloved child, I watched the releasing produce its most devastating effect at the relational level. A person who stops expecting to be fought for approaches every relationship differently from a person who carries the expectation. The person without the expectation does not position themselves to be advocated for. They position themselves to be self-sufficient within the relationship, carrying their own weight, managing their own battles, ensuring the relationship does not require the other person to fight on their behalf, because the expectation that anyone would fight has been deactivated by the absence that installed the conclusion. Self-sufficiency became the posture, and the posture prevented you from receiving what the through-the-night attorney was producing. My dear one, the attorney's work does not arrive at a client who has deactivated the expectation of being represented. It arrives at the case, and the case and the client are connected. But the client whose reception system has been deactivated by the releasing of the expectation processes the arriving advocacy, the way a person with a disconnected phone processes incoming calls. The calls are being made. The phone is not receiving. The phone is about to be reconnected by the evidence of a case being argued that the client did not know was in progress. Type reconnecting if you stopped expecting anyone to fight for you and restructured your entire approach to difficulty around self-sufficiency, deactivating the reception system that would have registered the advocacy being performed on your behalf. And the through-the-night attorney's work is about to reconnect the reception by providing evidence of a case being argued that the client, whose phone was disconnected, did not know was in progress. The self-sufficiency was never evidence that you are not worth fighting for. It was the survival adaptation of a client who did not know their case had been transferred to an attorney whose through-the-night investment exceeds anything the visible advocates could have sustained. My beloved one, I need to permanently separate the visible absence of advocacy from the actual status of the case. Your system classified the absence of visible fighters as evidence that the case was not being fought. The truth is, the case was being fought at a level the visible layer does not operate at. In rooms the client does not enter, by an attorney whose investment in the outcome is personal rather than professional. Through the night, while the client was sitting in the waiting area, processing the silence as abandonment. The silence was the attorney working, not the case being abandoned. My child, the visible advocates who thinned during the transfer season were operating at the business hours level. The standard, during the day, effort proportional to obligation level of support that casual advocacy produces. Casual advocacy is real. Casual advocacy is genuine. But casual advocacy does not work through the night. Casual advocacy does not take a case personally, and casual advocacy does not produce the specific every argument constructed, every piece of evidence assembled, conviction-driven quality of representation that a through-the-night attorney generates for a client, whose cases the attorney believes in, at a level the casual advocates could not match. The thinning was an upgrade, not a downgrade, my dear one. The self-sufficiency you developed during the visible support absence was reasonable at the visible level and unnecessary at the actual level. Because the actual level, the through-the-night level where the real case is being argued, has never been without representation. The attorney has been working since the transfer. The arguments have been building since the visible support thinned, and the case file that is being assembled on your behalf is larger than anything the business hours advocates could have produced. The case file is substantial, and substantial produces outcomes. The attorney just finished constructing the final argument, and the specific case file closing, last piece of evidence placed, the argument is now airtight completion that the through-the-night work just produced is generating a shift in the case's trajectory that the client is feeling for the first time as something is changing, but I cannot identify what. My beloved child, something shifted within the last few days. Not in the battle. In the atmosphere around the battle, the specific, almost imperceptible, the opposition just lost confidence shift that occurs when the arguments being assembled in the attorney's office reach the completion point and the completed case file begins producing an effect in the spiritual atmosphere of the case even before the arguments are formally presented. The opposition felt the case file complete, and the opposition's confidence just changed. My dear one, I need you to understand what happens when a through-the-night attorney completes the argument construction. The case is not yet won. The arguments have not yet been presented. But the completion of the construction produces a specific atmospheric effect. The way a fully loaded weapon changes the dynamic of a room before it is fired. The case file's completion changed the atmosphere of your battle. Before the case file's contents were formally deployed, the atmosphere changed. And the change is what you felt. I have been managing the case behind every season of the visible support absence. While you were carrying the battle alone and restructuring around self-sufficiency and deactivating the expectation of being fought for, I was in the attorney's office, overseeing the construction, ensuring the evidence being assembled was comprehensive, confirming that every argument being built addressed a specific dimension of the battle the client was fighting without knowing. The same battle was being argued from a different angle in a room the client could not access. My child, the construction is complete, the case file is closed, and the presenting is next. Type atmosphere shifted if something changed in the atmosphere around your battle within the last few days. The opposition losing confidence without identifiable cause. And the shift is the through-the-night attorney completing the final argument, because a completed case file produces an atmospheric effect. Before the arguments are formally presented the way, a fully prepared defense changes the dynamic of a case before the courtroom session begins. They are battling for you, and someone trusts you more than you imagine. The title carries both statements because the battling and the trusting are not separate events, but are the same event, expressed in two dimensions. The attorney's fighting being the action, and the attorney's trust being the fuel that produces the action at the through-the-night intensity the case required, my dear one. I need you to understand the relationship between the trust and the fight. An attorney who does not trust the client fights with professional competence. An attorney who trusts the client personally fights with conviction, and conviction produces a different quality of argument than competence. The way a person defending someone they believe in produces a different energy in the room than a person defending someone they were assigned to. The attorney fighting your case was not assigned. The attorney chose, and the choosing was produced by trust. My beloved child, this is directly connected to the title and to the specific loneliness your battle has been producing. The title says, someone trusts you more than you imagine. The more than you imagine is the distance between what you believe about your own fight-worthiness and what the attorney sees in the client, whose case the attorney took personally. The attorney's trust in you exceeds your trust in yourself by a margin the self-sufficiency could never have calculated, because the self-sufficiency was built on the assumption that no one was fighting, and the attorney's trust was building arguments on the assumption that the client was worth every hour the night contained. My child, the trust is not abstract. The trust is measured in hours. Every hour the attorney has been working through the night is an hour of trust converted into action. And the number of hours invested in the case file that was just completed tells you the volume of trust the attorney carries for the client the hours were invested on behalf of. The hours are substantial, and substantial hours reveal substantial trust. The attorney is walking toward the courtroom right now, my beloved child, and the specific case file underarm, arguments prepared, every piece of evidence organized, conviction-fueled stride that the through-the-night attorney is carrying toward the room where the case will be presented is the stride of someone who has been preparing for this session since the night began, and whose confidence in the outcome is proportional to the hours invested in the arguments the session will deploy. I need you to feel the proximity of the presenting, not the distant, someone is vaguely on my side. Maybe support exists somewhere proximity that the visible support absence was producing as the default relationship between you and the concept of being fought for. The present tense, attorney in the hallway, courtroom door approaching, case file complete, trust converted to argument, about to be presented proximity of a defense that was built through the night and is now being carried toward the room where the outcome of your battle is about to be determined. The attorney is in the hallway, the courtroom is ahead, and the case file is complete. My dear one, everything has been building toward this courtroom. The visible support that thinned when the case was transferred. The alone-in-the-battle conclusion that the thinning produced. The self-sufficiency that restructured the approach to difficulty around the absence of visible fighters. The deactivated expectation of being fought for. The through-the-night work that was happening in the office the client could not access. The atmospheric shift the completed case file produced. And now, the presenting. The specific courtroom level, every argument deployed. The case is being formally made moment that the through-the-night investment was always building toward. My child, the courtroom session is not a hearing. It is a verdict session. The arguments are not being presented for evaluation. They are being presented for ruling. And a ruling produced by through-the-night arguments, constructed from personal conviction about the client, produces a different verdict than a ruling produced by business hours. Arguments constructed from professional obligation. The verdict session is about to begin, and the case file is airtight. Type verdict session if the attorney is walking toward the courtroom right now. Case file complete. Arguments prepared. Conviction fueled by trust. And the presenting that is about to happen is not a hearing but a verdict session, where through-the-night arguments built from personal belief in the client are about to produce a ruling whose outcome is proportional to the conviction that constructed every argument the case file contains. The courtroom door just opened. The attorney just entered. And the case file that was built through the night by someone whose trust in you exceeds anything you have been told directly is now being placed on the table in front of a judge, whose ruling on the battle you believed you were fighting alone is about to be determined by arguments the client never saw being constructed. My beloved child, this is the moment. The moment the client who has been sitting in the waiting area, believing no one was working on their case, discovers that an attorney has been in the office through the night, constructing arguments, assembling evidence, converting trust into advocacy with the specific, through the night, case file airtight, conviction-driven investment that only a personally taken case produces. The moment the battle that felt solo is revealed as a battle that was always being fought on two fronts. The visible front, where the client was carrying the weight, and the invisible front, where the attorney was building the case. Two fronts, one battle, and the invisible front just entered the courtroom. They are battling for you, and someone trusts you more than you imagine. The title said battling. The attorney confirms it. The title said trusts you more than you imagine. The case file's thickness confirms it. And the attorney who just entered the courtroom is carrying the case file with the specific, I have been working on this all night. The arguments are complete. The trust in this client fueled every hour confidence that a through-the-night attorney produces when the conviction about the client exceeds the difficulty of the case. My child, the judge is looking at the case file. The arguments are being presented, and the arguments are not the cautious, professional, let us see what happens arguments that business hours advocacy produces. They are the bold, convicted, I took this case personally, and I am presenting accordingly arguments that through-the-night trust produces in an attorney whose belief in the client is the strongest piece of evidence the file contains. The strongest evidence is the trust, and the trust is being presented right now. Now that the attorney has entered the courtroom, and the case file is being presented. Everything about the alone in the battle identity that governed your relationship with your own fight worthiness is being permanently dismantled by the evidence of a through-the-night defense the client never knew was being built. My dear child, this is what happens when a client who believed they were unrepresented discovers their case has been in the hands of an attorney whose through-the-night investment exceeds anything the visible layer of support could have produced. The alone identity does not merely adjust, it collapses, because the alone identity was built on the premise that no one was fighting. And the courtroom just revealed a fighter whose case file is thicker than anything the alone identity could accommodate. The premise just met its contradiction, and the contradiction is holding a case file. My beloved child, the collapse is producing cascading effects across every area of your identity where the self-sufficiency was governing your posture. The "I am not the kind of person people fight for" conclusion is being overturned because someone is fighting right now in a courtroom with through-the-night arguments constructed from personal conviction. The deactivated expectation of being fought for is being reconnected because the evidence of a case file built during the hours the client was sleeping is the most powerful reactivation signal a disconnected reception system can process. The reception is reconnecting by the evidence of the fighting, and the self-sufficiency is being restructured from survival mechanism to partnership posture, because a client who discovers they have an attorney does not abandon their own participation in the case. They reposition from sole fighter to co-participant, from carrying everything alone to carrying their part. While the attorney carries the part, the client was never designed to carry solo. The repositioning changes the weight distribution, and redistributed weight is where the exhaustion finally begins to lift. Type co-participant if the alone identity just collapsed under the evidence of a through-the-night attorney, and the self-sufficiency is being restructured from sole fighter survival into co-participant partnership, because discovering the attorney does not eliminate your role in the case, but repositions you from carrying everything alone to carrying your part, while the attorney carries the part your frame was never designed to bear solo, and the weight redistribution is where the exhaustion finally lifts. Let me show you what your life looks like now that the attorney is in the courtroom and the case file is being presented, and the weight has been redistributed from solo carry to co-participant, because a person who discovers they have been represented through the night operates in the battle at a capacity the unrepresented version could never sustain. My dear one, the first thing that changes is the exhaustion. You have been running on solo fighter fuel. The specific "I am the only one carrying this. Every output comes from my reserves." No external source, contributing energy source, that a person without visible representation generates from internal reserves alone. Solo fighter fuel is expensive. It depletes faster than it replenishes, and the deficit between depletion and replenishment has been producing the specific, chronic, "I am running out of capacity" fatigue that the battle's solo posture was generating. The fuel source just changed. From solo to represented, my beloved child, the mornings change permanently. You have been waking into the weight, the first conscious awareness of each day, processing the familiar. The battle is mine alone. I must generate today's fighting capacity from yesterday's depleted reserves heaviness that the self-sufficiency was installing as the default morning condition. Tomorrow you wake into the represented. The morning processes the same battle, but the processing now includes the awareness that an attorney is in the courtroom right now. presenting arguments the client did not construct on a case the client did not know was being built. Represented mornings distribute the weight. Solo mornings concentrated it. The battle itself is being affected by the courtroom proceedings. The opposition that was engaging you at the solo fighter level is now encountering a defense at the attorney level, and attorney-level defense produces a different response from the opposition than solo fighter-level defense. The opposition calculated for a person fighting alone. The opposition did not calculate for a through-the-night attorney entering the courtroom with a case file the opposition has never seen. The calculation just changed, and recalculated opposition fights differently. People around you are going to notice the redistributed weight before you describe the attorney. Because a person who just transitioned from solo fighter to represented client carries an atmospheric shift that others register as something fundamentally different about the way the person occupies the battle they are in. My beloved child, the ones who watched you during the solo season, who observed the self-sufficient posture, who sensed the specific quality of a person carrying distributed weight load on a single frame, who perhaps attributed the exhaustion to insufficient faith, when the exhaustion was always the overload of a person bearing a co-participant load without the co-participant. Those people are about to encounter the represented version. They will say, the battle did not change, but you changed inside it. They will mean the attorney arrived. My child, there is a specific quality a person carries when they discover they have been fought for through the night by someone whose trust in them exceeds their trust in themselves. The quality is not relief. It is the specific I am not alone and I never was. The case was always being argued. The trust was always deeper than I knew quality of a person whose reception system just reconnected, and whose first incoming signal was the evidence of an attorney working through the night on a case the client did not know was in progress. The quality is represented confidence, and represented confidence attracts different outcomes than solo fighter exhaustion. Connections that require the specific atmospheric quality of a person who is visibly represented by an invisible advocate are forming around the redistributed weight right now. There are alliances and opportunities whose formation demands the specific someone is fighting for this person. The case is being argued at a level I cannot see, atmospheric signature that only a represented person produces. My dear one, what approaches a represented person is calibrated to the trust the representation carries. And through the night trust attracts through the night calibrated connections. Type represented confidence. If the transition from solo fighter to represented client is producing an atmospheric quality the exhaustion carrying version could not generate, and connections requiring the specific signature of someone who is visibly represented by an invisible advocate are forming because through the night trust produces through the night calibrated outcomes, and what approaches a represented person is calibrated to the depth of trust the representation carries. I need you to understand why the attorney took your case personally, rather than processing it through the standard advocacy system that handles cases at the business hours level. Because the reason the case was taken reveals something about what the attorney saw in you, that the self-sufficiency was preventing you from seeing in yourself. My beloved child, an attorney who takes a case personally does not take it because the case is easy to win. An attorney who takes a case personally takes it because the client carries something the attorney recognizes as worth fighting for at the through-the-night level. A quality, a value, a specific worth that the client may not be able to see in themselves, but that the attorney sees with the clarity of someone whose profession is evaluation, and whose evaluation of this specific client produced the conviction that full investment was the only appropriate response. The attorney evaluated you, and the evaluation produced through the night. My child, the quality the attorney saw is not a quality you have been performing. It is a quality you have been carrying. The specific cannot be manufactured, present even when the person does not know it is their quality that a person produces when their character exceeds their circumstances by a margin visible to those whose profession is detecting the gap between what a person is walking through and what the person walking through it is actually worth. The gap between your circumstances and your worth is what the attorney saw, and the gap produced the conviction. My dear one, I chose you for the through-the-night representation because the assignment embedded in the outcome of your case requires a person whose worth was affirmed not by their own self-assessment, but by the investment of an attorney whose evaluation carries more authority than the client's self-doubt. The attorney's investment is the evidence the self-doubt cannot produce on its own, and investment-level evidence outranks doubt-level evidence the way through the night hours outrank business hours. Your worth was never what the self-sufficiency was measuring. Your worth is what the attorney's hours reveal. The doubt surfacing right now is using the most isolation-hardened objection in its inventory. The voice that says invisible advocacy is a comforting idea, but the battle you are in requires visible fighters and visible arguments and visible support that can be measured by the evidence the visible world provides. My child, it sounds like this. An attorney working in a room I cannot enter is an attorney whose work I cannot verify. Arguments being constructed on my behalf in spaces I have no access to are arguments whose existence I must take on faith rather than on evidence. And faith in invisible advocacy has been the position I have been holding for the duration of a battle whose visible evidence has consistently shown me fighting alone. The invisible attorney is a nice idea, but nice ideas do not change the visible dynamics of a battle being fought on a visible battlefield. That doubt just evaluated invisible advocacy by visible evidence standards, and visible evidence standards cannot assess what operates at the through-the-night level. My beloved child, the visible battlefield is not where the case is being decided. The visible battlefield is where the case is being experienced. The case is being decided in the courtroom. The specific behind closed doors, attorney before judge, arguments being presented room, where the ruling that determines the outcome of the visible battle is being produced by evidence the visible battlefield never contained. Visible battles are won in invisible courtrooms. That is how the system operates. The attorney's work does not require your verification to produce its effect. The arguments do not need the client's observation to carry their weight before the judge, and the ruling being produced in the courtroom right now will express itself on the visible battlefield as a shift whose cause the visible evidence cannot explain. Because the cause was constructed in a room the visible battlefield does not have access to. The shift is coming. The cause is invisible, and invisible causes produce visible effects. Type invisible courtroom if the doubt argued that invisible advocacy cannot change a visible battle. And you now understand the visible battlefield is where the case is experienced, while the courtroom is where the case is decided, meaning visible battles are won in invisible rooms by arguments the visible evidence never contained, and the ruling being produced right now will express itself as a visible shift whose invisible cause was constructed through the night by an attorney the client could not see working. During every night of the solo battle, I was not in the courtroom managing the case, while the client fought the visible battle without anyone beside them on the battlefield. I was on the battlefield, with you, my beloved child, present in the fighting, carrying the weight, beside the person carrying the weight. While the attorney was in the office, and the case was being built, and the arguments were being constructed, I was beside the client whose solo fighter posture was producing the exhaustion the redistributed weight was always designed to relieve. You imagined a God who was managing the invisible advocacy from the courtroom side, while the visible battle was being fought by a client whose solo season was observed from the legal chambers without personal involvement in the battlefield-level experience the client was enduring. I was never at the chambers during your solo season. I was on the battlefield, with you, my child. Being on the battlefield with a client who does not know they have an attorney is a specific form of presence. The God beside you on the visible battlefield could see the attorney working in the office. The client beside the God could not, and the gap between what the God could see and what the client could see produced the specific, I know something you do not know yet quality of a presence whose comfort was limited by the information the client was not yet ready to receive. There were nights on the battlefield when the exhaustion was producing its deepest effects, when the solo carrying had depleted the last reserve, and the body was operating on the fumes of a capacity that had been exceeded for longer than the body was designed to sustain. On those nights I was beside you, not revealing the attorney because the case file was not yet complete, and premature revelation of incomplete representation produces more anxiety than the solo fighting it was meant to relieve. My dear one, the case file is complete now. The revelation is tonight, and the waiting to tell you was the hardest patience the battlefield presence required. I know the exact night on the battlefield where the solo carrying produced the thought that nearly ended the fighting. The specific, floor level, I cannot sustain this for one more day moment, where the client's capacity reached absolute zero, and the decision to stop fighting entirely was separated from the decision to continue by a margin. So thin the outcome was uncertain for the seconds the margin was being measured. My dear one, not the first hard night, not the most recent. The night the stopping almost happened, the specific evening where the cumulative weight of the battle plus the cumulative weight of fighting it alone, plus the cumulative weight of believing no one found you worth fighting for converged at a single moment whose total exceeded the remaining capacity by a margin the body registered as unsustainable. My beloved child, I know that night because two things happened simultaneously that the client was only aware of one of. On the battlefield, the client reached absolute zero. In the attorney's office, the attorney reached the breakthrough argument, the specific. This changes the entire case. I have been looking for this all-night discovery that an attorney makes when the through-the-night investment finally produces the argument case was always waiting for. The client's lowest moment and the attorney's breakthrough moment occurred on the same night, at the same hour. My child, the coincidence was not accidental. The attorney's breakthrough was produced by the same spiritual pressure the client's collapse was producing, because the urgency of the client's depletion on the battlefield is the urgency that accelerates the attorney's work in the office. The system is connected. The client's pain fuels the attorney's pace, and the pace that the deepest pain produced on the darkest night is the pace that found the breakthrough argument the case was built around. The God who was beside you at absolute zero is the God confirming tonight that the argument discovered at that exact hour is the argument being presented in the courtroom right now. Type same hour if God just identified the night the solo carrying reached absolute zero, and at the exact hour the client's capacity was depleted. The attorney discovered the breakthrough argument the case was built around, because the urgency of the client's pain accelerates the attorney's pace, and the breakthrough produced on the darkest night is the argument being presented in the courtroom right now. Now that the attorney is in the courtroom and the case file is being presented and the weight has been redistributed, there is one thing I need you to do, my beloved child, and it is the instruction that determines whether the ruling the courtroom produces is received by a client whose posture is positioned to integrate the verdict into the battle the verdict was always aimed at resolving. Let yourself be fought for. Not continue carrying the battle as though the attorney does not exist. Not maintain the solo fighter posture alongside the representation as a backup system in case the attorney's work does not produce the outcome the case file was constructed to achieve. Let yourself be fought for. The specific, active, I am releasing the solo grip. I am permitting the attorney's work to carry what I have been carrying alone. Surrender of the weight the self-sufficiency has been sustaining. My child, letting yourself be fought for is not passivity. It is repositioning. The solo fighter carried everything. The represented client carries their part, and the distance between everything and their part is the distance the attorney is carrying, meaning letting yourself be fought for is the releasing of the portion that was never yours to carry onto the arms of the one who has been building the case to carry it. The releasing will activate the self-sufficiency's resistance. The self-sufficiency was installed to prevent dependence, and releasing weight onto an attorney's advocacy feels like dependence to a system whose survival was built on the elimination of dependence entirely. The resistance is the self-sufficiency protecting its position, not wisdom protecting the client. When the resistance fires respond with the evidence, the case file exists. The through-the-night hours were invested. The attorney entered the courtroom. The arguments are being presented, and the evidence of a case being argued by someone whose trust in the client exceeds the client's trust in themselves is stronger than the self-sufficiency's objection to releasing weight onto representation the self-sufficiency does not yet trust. Trust the attorney. The attorney already trusts you. You made it to the courtroom revelation, my beloved child, and I need you to stand in the awareness of being represented long enough to feel what it means to discover that someone has been fighting for you through the night in a room you could not enter, driven by a trust in you that exceeds anything the solo season allowed you to believe about your own fight-worthiness. Feel the representation, not the aloneness, not the solo fighter exhaustion that was produced by a frame carrying distributed weight without the distribution, not the deactivated expectation that rewired every relationship around the assumption that no one would fight. The representation, the specific, through the night, case file constructed, trust-fueled, personally taken, attorney in the courtroom right now representation that was happening in a room you could not see while you were sitting in the waiting area, concluding no one was working, someone was working, the entire night, on your case, because they trust you. I want to thank you for something the solo season made almost impossible to sustain. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for carrying a distributed weight load on a single frame for a duration that exceeded the frame's design capacity. Thank you for the night the capacity reached absolute zero and the stopping almost happened, and the margin was measured in seconds, and the seconds produced the continuation, the stopping almost prevented. My dear child, thank you for continuing at absolute zero. Because a client who stops fighting on the battlefield before the attorney's breakthrough argument is discovered is a client whose case file lacks the urgency-produced argument. The breakthrough night generated. Your pain at zero fueled the attorney's pace at breakthrough, and the breakthrough argument being presented in the courtroom right now exists because you did not stop on the night the stopping almost won. Let the tears come, not solo tears, not exhaustion tears, represented tears. The tears of a client discovering for the first time that someone trusted them enough to take the case personally and fight through the night in a room the client could not see, undone by the revelation that the loneliness of the battle was never the reality of it. Type represented tears if tears are forming right now, because you just discovered an attorney has been working through the night on your case, driven by trust in you that exceeds your own. And the tears are not exhaustion, but the specific overwhelm of a person who has been fighting alone, discovering they were never actually alone because someone whose belief in them exceeds their belief in themselves has been arguing on their behalf in a room the client could not enter. The entire time the client was concluding, no one was fighting. You are not the client fighting alone in the waiting area anymore, my beloved child. That identity, the one who measured support by what was visible and found the visible empty, the one who concluded the absence of vocal advocates, was evidence that the case was not worth fighting for to anyone but the person carrying it, the one whose self-sufficiency restructured every relationship around the elimination of the expectation of being fought for, the one who deactivated the reception system that would have registered the through-the-night advocacy being performed in a room the client could not enter, the one whose absolute zero night almost ended the fighting at the exact hour the attorney was discovering the breakthrough argument the entire case file was built around. That identity was permanently retired the moment the courtroom door opened and the attorney entered, carrying a case file whose thickness was measured in through-the-night hours, and whose every argument was constructed from a trust in the client that exceeds anything the client has ever been told to their face. You are the represented client now, and represented changes everything the aloneness was teaching. The solo fighter identity that governed your weight carrying, your relational posture, your battle exhaustion, your expectation of advocacy, and the conclusion that you are not the kind of person someone fights for, has been permanently dismantled by the evidence of an attorney whose through-the-night investment is the most powerful statement of trust a case can contain, louder than any spoken affirmation, more convincing than any verbal assurance, because hours invested through the night on a personally taken case are the currency of trust, and the currency has been spent at a volume the self-doubt cannot outbid. My dear child, you were always worth the through the night. The attorney knew it before you did, and the knowing produced the fighting. From this moment forward, you carry the identity of a person whose battles are being fought on two fronts, not a person who fights alone. A person whose visible fighting on the battlefield is supported by an invisible attorney in a courtroom, whose through-the-night arguments produce rulings the visible battle could never generate from the solo fighter level. Not a person who deactivates the expectation of being fought for. A person whose expectation is permanently reactivated by the evidence of a case file built through the night by someone whose trust was the fuel. The courtroom is in session. The arguments are being presented. The judge is hearing the case, and the ruling that is being produced by through-the-night conviction is about to express itself on the visible battlefield as a shift whose cause the visible evidence cannot explain. Because the cause was constructed in a room the battlefield does not have access to, by an attorney the client did not know was working, the shift is coming to the visible battle. The ruling is approaching, and the client who was fighting alone on a battlefield they believed was their sole responsibility is about to receive the outcome of a case that was being argued in a courtroom they never entered by an attorney they never hired, whose trust in the client was the fuel that powered every hour of every argument that is now being presented before a judge, whose verdict was always going to favor the client the through-the-night attorney believed in. Walk into the verdict, my beloved child. The case was always being fought. The attorney was always working. The trust was always deeper than anything you were told. And the God who was on the battlefield beside you during the solo season, while simultaneously overseeing the case construction in the attorney's office, is the same God confirming tonight that you were never alone in the battle, and the loneliness you felt was the client's experience of a case being argued in a room the client could not enter, not the reality of a person who was unrepresented. You were always represented. The representation was always through the night, and the trust that fueled every argument was always the trust of someone who believed in you more than you have ever believed in yourself. Subscribe to this channel so that every time someone is battling for you in a room, you cannot enter the revelation reaches you before the solo fighter identity convinces you. The weight is entirely yours to carry. You are not someone who fights alone anymore. You are someone whose through-the-night attorney is presenting a case file right now, whose every argument was constructed from trust in a client the attorney believes in at a depth the client has never been told about directly. The next message carries the first verdict report from the courtroom, and what the ruling produces on the visible battlefield will prove that invisible advocacy was always real, and the attorney was always working, and the trust was always deeper than the client imagined. Type never alone if you are leaving this message permanently changed. Knowing the visible support thinned because the case was transferred, not abandoned, the self-sufficiency was survival, not identity. The deactivated expectation was a disconnection, not a diagnosis. The absolute zero night fueled the breakthrough argument. The attorney's trust exceeds the client's self-doubt. And the God who stood beside you on the battlefield during the solo season is the same God confirming that the through-the-night attorney was always working, and the case file was always being built, and the trust that fueled every argument was always the deepest thing anyone has ever invested in the battle the client believed they were fighting alone.